Okay.
You may begin,
Yeah,
JR.
thank you so much. Presenting our work together with two of my colleagues. I go by JR, so please feel free to call me JR. I'm from Penn State. I'm professor of information sciences and technology. I'm going to have Kurt and Lorraine introduce themselves.
Oh, hi. I'm so sorry.
Go ahead, Lorraine.
My name is Lorraine Ramirez Villarin. I am an assistant professor for middle grades, secondary, and science education at the University of North Georgia.
And I'm Kurt Winkleman, professor and department head of chemistry at Valdosta State University.
Wonderful. Thank you for the introductions. I'd like to pose a quick question. How many of you are familiar with this term, emergency remote teaching, or ERT? A quick show of hands. Let me see. If you have your cameras on, quick show of hands.
Yeah, I see 2, 3.
Okay, great. Yeah,
4.
For those of you who are not familiar with this term, we thought we would define it, and the definition is of course there. It's a temporary instructional response to an emergency, and we're right in the middle of it, which is COVID. So maybe you didn't know about the term, but you know what it is pretty much, and it gives us a lot of stress, as you know. And one of the biggest things we have to do is really to change our modalities when it comes to teaching, and we've been doing a lot of remote teaching, and I guess one of the reasons why we're doing this conference online is probably due to this emergency. So let's move on to our next slide.
So we actually wanted to ask this question. You have to, go back to 2020 when, of course, everyone had to transition from face-to-face to online or remote learning. So how would you rate your academic experience during this transition? And we have a rating scale from 1 to 5. 1, of course, being that you were not at all satisfied. 5 being that it was A-okay. We did it. It's wonderful. So in the chat, I don't know if you would like to maybe place your rating so that we can gauge and see how well or how bad it went.
Yeah, I'm monitoring the chat together with Kurt. So let's see. Oh, somebody says 4.
4, 3.
Oh, lots of 3s, and yeah.
2. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have a little bit of everything. I like that someone said as a student, a 2, as a faculty member, a 4. That's a good way of looking at it.
It's great. It's very consistent with the theme of the conference, diversity.
Yes. So we would like to share some of the sentiments from our colleagues when it came to their experiences with ERT. When you look at all of these adjectives here, you will notice that there's the good, the bad, and the really ugly. So there is a fluctuation, there's a diversity when it comes to how their experiences went, from someone saying, hey, I became tech savvy, which was really great, to, well, this experience was hard because it was hard to stay afloat. So of course, that would be the ugly part. So because of the sentiments, then of course, we came together. We are a research team. We have been working together for the past maybe 4 years now. We came together back in the spring semester of 2020, and we were wondering if we would be able to answer some of the questions based on successes and challenges that ERT brought to us. So what we wanted actually to do, and our main goals, was to see whether or not we would be able to document and share any creative solutions that would help others, and maybe even create a repository of new ideas and hands-on activities. Part of our team is Dr. Larry Reagan, who is seen in the picture. He is happily retired. enjoying his retirement. He was a professor at Penn State as well. So when it came to our methods, the way that we did this, we said that we were going to try to do a mixed methods data collection for our pilot study. And of course, wanting that quantitative aspect and the qualitative aspect for it, we really wanted to include the qualitative aspect to strengthen the validity of the study. So we came up with a 12-item questionnaire. In those 12 items, there was like open-ended questions, Likert type kind of responses, and multiple choice. And we disseminated that questionnaire to higher education, STEM education in faculty and higher education. Then we actually met with them through a series of webinars. During the webinars, we pretty much just gathered ideas, they shared their experiences, and we were just pretty much trying to look for potential solutions. From those participants in the webinars, we actually did ask around 42% of them. We made some semi-structured interviews. We wanted to go a little more into depth when it came to their perspectives and their unique experiences based on ERT. So that first part was with the faculty members, and then Kurt will talk about the ERT and STEM student jam that we did to gather that feedback from students.
Yeah, after talking with faculty about how they felt there was a lack of connection between them and their students, it started us thinking about, well, what is the student's perspective on this? And so instead of doing interviews and a survey, we chose to invite students to a what we call a student jam, which is kind of like a workshop, but it's got more competitive elements to it. It was definitely a day full of hands-on activities. So the students did things like they're working in groups. They would come up with memes that express their views of the COVID lockdowns and online education. They also developed some ideas for how they would like faculty to teach STEM subjects in a remote teaching environment.
Yes, we actually, someone in the chat asked whether the jams were in person. They were. We followed the CDC guidelines, and everyone was wearing a mask when we did the activity. It was actually really surprising. It was like students playing the role of faculty members, and we were asking them if they were, if they would play the role of the faculty member, like be in their shoes and have to transition those hands-on activities to remote learning, how they would do it. And it was surprising. We got a lot of insight from them, which we're going to share a little later. So, of course, as a team, we got together and we were thinking, okay, so what are our considerations? What are the points that we need to consider? So JR, take it away.
Yeah, so to help with our data collection, we had to think about, what to ask in terms of what their challenges were. And it was important for us to identify all those potential challenges. And you see a lot of those on the slide. And one thing we realized was that these things or the categories could be divided into mainly two parts. One is more materialistic, more tangible. The other is more, I would say, softer, in a sense that it's more like mental or psychological and emotional. So the ones you see there, like uncertainties, engagement, communication, sense of community and belonging, which is really important when it comes to engaging our students, we could really divide these up into these two categories. And we suspected that maybe I'm not gonna spill the beans right now here, but we had our suspicion. Let me just stop here because, Lorraine's gonna talk about it.
Okay, so when it comes to the findings from the survey, of course, starting with that quantitative portion, on the questionnaire, it was interesting that we provided the faculty with options, and they would be able to check which options they thought they had gone through while doing the transition. Well, of course, number one, they felt that there was a lack of face-to-face interaction, being that it was remote teaching. In this case, that lack of face-to-face interaction, they would say it would hinder that human connection, that sense of belonging. So it's not the same, of course, as when you are in person with someone. Number two, or the second challenge that that we had to definitely take under account was the access or the accessibility of technical resources. So, of course, we know that it was not just the Wi-Fi, not just because their computer died or whatever. Some of them actually didn't have a computer before all of this happened. Many of them had to take their courses through their cell phone. And some of the faculty that we interviewed mentioned that this became worse in financially deprived areas and for these students that, of course, had to go back to work. And then it was overwhelming for them to of course, to keep up with the work. Then, of course, the poor communication, not just from the part of the faculty, also institutional. Maybe the expectations were not clear or they would constantly change. So, of course, that there was a little frustration in that part. And then for that qualitative portion, and that's why we did the semi-structured interviews and the student jam, in both, the highlight was the need for elements to promote inclusion in ERT. And we know that for the faculty, they were mentioning that they knew that they had to be more empathetic and that they had to be more flexible and more understanding. And then in the jam, it's interesting that even though they had to play the role of the faculty member, in their presentations, they focused on how they, as a faculty member, would allow the student, some things or some grace when it came to submitting work or accessing work based on the emergency and the situation. So that lack of community and sense of belonging was certainly palpable from the part of the students. So, of course, we have a question, and it's how do we promote inclusion? JR?
That's right.
This is all you.
I know. I would say the secret weapon is, I shouldn't be using such a violent word, by the way, sorry about it. The secret sauce is, I think, really cultivating and demonstrating this genuine caring for your students. When you can show that you really care, that makes a huge difference when it comes to inclusion. That was one of the reasons why we decided to focus on the I of DEI, because DEI is huge, it's very comprehensive. You cannot really try to do everything, but in our research, as a step forward, we thought focusing on inclusion definitely makes a very clear sense. And that is also supported by, the research and the literature out there. And Lorraine's gonna talk about that.
So when doing the research, actually when we started going through the data and looking at the findings and realizing that even though our main goal, or at least the primary goal, was to focus on technological resources that maybe we could create and share with other colleagues, we were like, wait a minute, it was like an aha moment when we noticed that this is mostly being steered, from that emotional aspect. And it's basically because people are in need of that mindfulness and compassion because times are tough and we understand. So looking at the theory, we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Of course, as human beings, we have basic needs that we have to fulfill, but any disruptions when it comes to those needs in the hierarchy will hinder the chances of human realization. So I know we are all capable of getting there, but sometimes we do need that helping hand, or at least, that compassion for us to move forward. If we don't feel included, then of course we're not going to succeed. And we know that many of them didn't feel that sense of community or belonging.
So when it comes to really promoting this sense of belonging or sense of inclusion, being included, or promoting this sense of community, we thought we could use a lot of mindfulness and compassion. And that's why we're emphasizing mindfulness and compassion in this presentation. I wanted to actually pose another question to make our session more interactive. Which is, are you familiar with the concept of mindfulness? So let me see a quick have a quick show of hands. How many of you are familiar?
Okay, we have 3.
Or you could just type your answer in the chat. So there are lots of yeses.
4, 5. Okay.
Wonderful. But once again, just to reiterate the definition here, to me, everybody has probably his or her own definition of what mindfulness is. But to me, it's really an ability to focus on the present so that you don't really have to worry about the past. You don't have to worry about the future. And that's how you can be aware of, what you're doing at that moment. And here, awareness is important because when you want to, make that harsh remark to your student, if you're aware, if you're present at that moment, you're going to take a moment and give it a second thought, and you're not going to do it. And that will be the stepping stone when it comes to promoting more inclusion in the classroom. And that's why mindfulness is so relevant in terms of, promoting inclusion. And compassion, I would say, is a version of, empathy, but it's a mindful version of empathy. Just because if you're just empathetic, you just feel sorry. However, when you're mindful, that's when you take actions to really help the person. Okay, we have a 2-minute warning, I think. Oh, we should be mindful of our time. Yes, of course. Thank you.
As we, Lorraine and JR and I continue our work together, we are interested in getting feedback from this audience about how important you think mindfulness and mindful compassion can be for generating inclusive learning environments, whether they are face-to-face, which we will hopefully return to completely, or if we continue to do remote teaching. So feel free to, in the chat to give us your feedback about this topic. We are, based on our preliminary results of this study, we are trying to continue this studying this topic with a couple of webinars that we are putting together in March and hopefully a workshop in April to look at the uses of mindful practices, actual things that faculty can do in their own lives, like your own meditation, or things you can do with students. And I noticed somebody in the chat said that they began each class session with meditation. So some of you already are way ahead of us on this. But we're interested in exploring the uses of mindfulness in STEM higher education to create an inclusive learning environment, which in and of itself is a worthy goal. But we're also interested in sort of the downstream effects. How does this influence student performance? How does it influence students' expectations of themselves, and what are their, in terms of their self-efficacy of achieving their academic goals? I think we're going to be posting a link to a survey that collects a little bit of information from you. I think JR is going to put that in, and I believe that is all.
Thank you all. That was great. Now you open up the floor to...
Just one quick question, sorry. Is so the way we wanted to run our presentation was to have the participants to have maybe just a couple minutes to finish the survey. It's only like 5-question kind of survey. And once they take the survey, we would like to go over some of the responses and have conversations based on the survey. So we're going to give them some time to take the survey, if that's okay. Is everybody okay with the link? Okay.
Fine by me.
Yeah, just 2 minutes or 3 minutes. So if you could give us another 2-minute warning or something like that after 2 minutes, then we'll go over their answers together a little bit. Thank you.
Now, while everybody is hopefully clicking on the link to fill out the survey, I want to see, there was a question about earlier, any mention of students with disabilities. I believe that question came up when we were discussing the student jam and the faculty interviews that we did. JR and Lorraine can correct me if I'm not remembering this, but I don't think this came up as a major issue. Not that it isn't important, but I think from my own experience working with students with disabilities, sometimes the use of new technologies can be helpful, but sometimes it can also cause conflicts with how students, with their existing screen readers and voice and text to voice programs and things like that. But no, it wasn't a major topic of discussion during the jam or the faculty interviews.
It could be something to consider for the workshop and the webinars.
Yes, definitely. And the responses are trickling in. I know we have like 38 people present, and I have 13 responses so far. The number's going up. So whenever we have, all the responses, I think you can go ahead and go over some of the responses. While we're waiting, I guess in the meantime, if you're done with the survey, if you have anything you want to ask, I guess feel free to do that too. Yeah.
You'll have 4 minutes in this
Yeah. We'll
4 minutes.
Yeah, we're not gonna go over every single thing. So we'll just maybe pick 1 or 2 responses. But
if anyone has any questions, I think that would certainly we could accommodate for that.
Yeah, one thing I can tell you right now, just based on the data I have here, 92.9% of people said, because the question was, do you think mindfulness and compassion could serve as a tool to promote inclusion in the classroom? And the answer is overwhelmingly yes, because it says 92.9% of people are basically saying yes.
Okay. JR, we have someone raising her hand.
Okay.
Lisette Torres.
Thank you. I'm totally on board for this. I'm a meditation geek, so mindfulness I'm so excited about. But in terms of the webinars in March, could you tell us more, I guess, what you are imagining some of the future activities will look like?
So Kurt is in charge of the webinar, so you can talk about it. But I mean, if you need help, let me know.
Yeah, both webinars will explore the importance of inclusion and mindfulness. And part of their purpose is to get everybody who's interested in participating up to speed on the workshop topics, which will be focused more on, as I mentioned, some of those downstream effects of creating inclusive learning environments, mainly with regard to retention and overcoming how we can overcome and minimize biases that are in students and faculty's educational experiences, especially with regard to gender and racial discrimination. And so we're going to use the webinars as a way of gathering information from interested participants, which can then help us mold an agenda for the workshop. So it's not only the webinars are a combination of being educational for the participants, but also getting feedback from our interested audience, so that we can design a better workshop for them.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes left.
Okay, I see that there's a question. Do we note any gender differences in our studies? Lorraine, did you want to answer that?
Gender differences based on participants of the survey, or
I think that was my interpretation of the question, unless
or was it in the jam?
Unless Dina want to. So did we notice any gender differences in the responses?
I think it's in the survey, in terms of the survey, Lorraine.
Any mentions? So for the survey, I believe, oh my God, I don't have the data right now, like right in front of me, but I do believe that it was pretty equal when it came to faculty.
Yeah,
and
that was
because I remember we did ask the question, but we also, of course, set options for those that did not identify themselves as either female or male. But I do believe that we pretty much gathered almost like same for female and male. It was pretty even.
That was my experience as well. And let's see, from the survey, some of the responses, somebody mentioned that this is important always and more so now. And I think that's, something that we kind of learned along the way. When we start focusing on mindfulness, we realize that this is like an everyday benefit, not just a pandemic related benefit. Yeah. And so it's going to have these types of studies, and what we learn from them will have long lasting impact on education.
Time's up. Let's be mindful.
Thank you. Thank you, JR. Thank you all for attending. This is the end of our session. Thank you to all the presenters and all the attendees and all your responses, recommendations, suggestions, and questions. Please enjoy the rest of the conference today. We have dropped some useful conference links in the chat, and although this Zoom link will be closed, you can continue your conversations during the coffee and social hours, and you can find those in your conference program. Thank you guys so much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.